Elizabeth, welcome to CFO at Home. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks so much. I'm happy to be here.
I understand that today in your work as a financial strategist, you help women design their financial lives, particularly during life transitions, divorce, death of a spouse, marriage, that type of thing. But prior to that, you spent a couple of decades in the financial industry working with high end clients. Then divorce became a part of your personal story, and it seems to be when you transitioned into what you're doing currently. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I did spend nearly 20 years as a private banker here in Dallas, Texas, where I live, helping some of the wealthiest families in the country manage their money. And I had thought about my next steps for many years, although when I did go through my divorce, right about the time I turned 40, so I had all those big milestones, I decided to leave the corporate world and that it was just time. And I took a little bit of time off. And so now I've been able to branch out on my own and act more of as an unbiased advocate to clients. So I loved managing money. I'm still licensed to manage investments, but in my new role, rather than sell products or manage investments themselves, which there are thousands of people and frankly robots that can do very well, I focus more on the advice side. So I just sell my time rather than having to sell a specific product. And I love that because it allows me to be an unbiased advocate and guide clients through whatever they're going through with their advisors. Many of them have financial advisors and attorneys, so I can act as a support and an additional resource to that.
Yeah, no, no, I understand that somewhere along that same timeline, you were able to achieve financial independence, retire early, fire, some of the things associated with the fire movement, which I imagine may have given you more of a flexibility to determine exactly what you wanted to pursue because typically in the financial industry working with high-end clients means high-end dollars, where if you're giving other types of advice, it may not be as lucrative, much more rewarding in your case, in a lot of people's cases, but not as lucrative. So did your achievement of financial independence, was that one of the things that also enabled you to go in that direction?
Absolutely. I'm not going to make the big bank bucks selling my time. That doesn't scale very well. But to your point, it's definitely more rewarding. And it was a little bit of I consider myself retired early from my banking career. Never say never. If things implode, I could always go get another bank job. But that was part of the journey, was getting to a place financially where I felt like I don't have to have a certain number of clients to pay my mortgage. I'm not having to stress about a business plan, and I can do the kind of marketing I want and work with the kind of people that I want. This is definitely part of my personal fire journey. I've been in that industry and on all those online forums despite working at the big banks. I had a personal finance blog many years ago, and so I've been on that train for sure. I'm proud to have gotten to a point where I felt comfortable giving up those corporate dollars, if you will.
Yeah, I know when so many people hear about the fire movement, particularly in the beginning, it was about people who were living very sparsely. It was all about that short-term sacrifice and really living like a super frugal life. And ultimately that allowed them to retire early. But I know for a lot of people, just the frugality of it sounded like more than what they were willing to put themselves through. But I also know from having spoken to different guests that there are a lot of different flavors of fire. Could you tell us a little bit about your particular fire journey? Was it one of extreme frugality, or exactly what did that look like in terms of lifestyle as you were building to that point?
Sure. And I definitely would never claim to have been particularly frugal. I do live in an urban center and I have always loved to travel and have nice things. And I was blessed to start out with a big head start. My family paid for college and I didn't have to have student loan debt or a big debt repayment journey, which many people start out spending even up to a decade or more doing. So I had started out on first base, if you will, and was able really from being a high income professional and also marrying another high income professional, was able to not have to be so frugal, but also end up with a really high savings rate that enabled me a little bit of freedom today. Now, I've always been obsessed with the spreadsheets and maximizing and optimizing and all those things. But again, having a high income really does help with that. And I guess to your question about the flavor of fire, there are in today's day and age, I've heard the term fat fire in different definitions. And that would be what I would fall under, I think, if anything. If I really just had hated my job and didn't want to work, I probably could have quit a long time ago. And that was never the case. Corporate life is stressful, but I really loved helping people and managing money despite that. So as I hit my initial comfort level, I was able to work several more years. And also, not having children, candidly, is a huge help. I had saved as if I was going to save for college and need a big house in the suburbs and a good school district and all those things. And when I got divorced, part of what made me comfortable was realizing that wasn't happening, at least at this stage of my life. So I'm only responsible for myself. I can take a lot more risks. And that was a huge part of my journey as well.
Next time I talk to my kids, I'll have to remind them of that. If it weren't for you,
Oh, yeah.
but
I have
well,
9 nieces and
that
nephews, and I love spoiling them. I think family is very important. That path is not where I have ended up, and
right.
so at least I can have employment flexibility as a silver lining.
Yeah, yeah, and it's all turned out in the end. That's the important thing. One last question on this subject. So to sum it up, is your current situation more of a, if I wanted to not quit at work again, I could just retire and go to the beach and sip Mai Tais? Or is it more of a, I have enough resource where I can choose what I want to do as opposed to having to do the thing that pays me the most?
To be honest, I really, all assuming that things don't implode, there could always be the Great Depression too and World War III, and we'll all be back to work. But no, I waited and I was obsessive and conservative enough that I wanted to not have to work before I stepped off the corporate gravy train, if you will. I'm not, any extra income is great. But that said, I still am only in my early 40s, and I certainly don't necessarily intend to just sit on the beach and drink margaritas, although I love the beach and some margaritas as much as anybody else. Frankly, I've always loved writing, and there's a lot of types of work that I can do that might never make money. And so I really wanted the freedom to be able to pursue some creative pursuits, work with some clients. Several of the clients I've worked with already this year since starting my consulting business, I've waived the fee because they're frankly not in a great financial place. So being able to do those things and being able to be flexible was a big part of it. So while I will always welcome any extra income, it's not mandatory, assuming markets continue to be relatively normal.
And you mentioned earlier fat fire. I think that's what fat fire really means.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there's critical mass, that type of thing. If I were to just walk away, I could walk away. But I think it's interesting that even though you can do that, you don't choose to do that. So even though you were blessed enough to be a high income earner and in a position to reach fat fire at a relatively early age, I think for so many of us, reaching the point where we can do what we want to do, because even though you could just ride off into the sunset, you're really, you've reached fat fire, but you're using it in a way that doesn't fully leverage that, because you still have things that you want to do with your life. So you're not using it like fat fire. You're using it like, hey, I have enough resource where I can pick and choose what I want to do.
That's true. Although to a point, I didn't do anything for 8 months as far as income wise or working with anybody. So that's not that long in hindsight. Frankly, I thought I would be having an existential crisis before the end of the first year without a steady paycheck. And you envision all these things of, I'm going to write a book, and then I'm going to I'll have time to do all these different things. And it really is funny how your time fills and things slow down, and it's, how did I even have time for a full-time job previously while I'm doing this really so far part-time, because I'm not really doing a lot of active marketing. I'm not doing it. It really is in my mind still a fat fire lifestyle. So I might have a few hours a week that I'm billing right now, and so it's certainly nothing, it's not a meaningful income or paycheck, and I certainly don't rely on it at all in my financial planning. If it gets to the point where it's consistent enough and I have a steady enough client base, maybe that would change, and I would, like I said, I'm young and I'm only a couple of years into this, so I know enough to know, having worked with a lot of people before, that nothing lasts forever. And so who knows what I'll end up truly doing. But at this time, I do love not having to earn a certain income, which was so much of my focus for so much of my life, was the things we all talk about: maximizing my income, maximizing my savings rate, optimizing my investments. Of course, I still care about optimizing my investments, and I read all the news and all those things, but it has been a very weird shift in mindset to not be looking at A, getting a paycheck, and B, like optimizing or looking at income really. So it does change the way that I have to manage my personal finances.
But then again, that time did immediately fill up. You're in a position, not to put words in your mouth, but I think what I'm hearing is we can pull out one of the oldest cliches in the book and apply it here. You're free to pursue your passion. And
Mhm.
I think at least, hey, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. I'm a little past 40, but I think I'm approaching that time in my life where I can call it a day. And that's something that I still personally struggle with, the what will I do with myself thing. But pursuing a passion, I think once you get there, that is financial freedom, or at least how I've defined it for the purposes of this podcast, to to be able to do what you want to do, to be able to pursue your passion. And if your passion happens to come with a big paycheck, God bless. But if it doesn't, you still have flexibility enough to pursue that. So thank you for allowing me to go down that road a little bit. Anytime I talk to someone that's reached a point in life that you do, it's a personal finance podcast. I feel like we need to step down that road for a second. But
Yeah.
let me shift the conversation now to you work with women predominantly, like I said earlier, in their financial issues as they're going through certain life transitions. And that, understandably, knowing your story, I understand how that fits into the area of a passion for you. That's not really something we focus on this podcast, but I really wanted to have you on because it puts you in a position where I think you're probably pretty knowledgeable about certain things about the male female dynamic when it comes to money, or at least have a good perspective on how, and we're going to be very general here, quote unquote, how women look at money, the feminine view of
Mhm.
money and the masculine view of money. Again, very broad, but another topic that we come back to frequently on this podcast is that in order for couples to work together efficiently with money, that even in the financial coaching that I do and in financial coaching circles that I circulate in, that topic comes up as a sticking point constantly. The
Yeah.
old get getting two people on the same page part of this. And a lot of it comes back to understanding how each how the other views money. So some of that has to it's very personal, and it comes back to childhood and how you're raised and what was modeled and all that good stuff. But I happen to think some of it is more broad and innate as far as just masculine and feminine traits. I'd love to hear your view on that from the perspective of how those differ, and also, given those differences, any thoughts you might have on bridging those differences in terms of the challenges that it might create in communication and agreement.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add on to what you said, definitely broadly generalizing here, plenty of men and women are broad in their approach. But I think research has definitely indicated that, for example, male investors tend to be more risk taking. And there are some basic things that are quote unquote proven in the research. Whether that's innate or whether it's because of our society and how we were raised, I can't tell you. But I do love the topic and I read a lot about it. And I can tell you, as a woman who had worked in the wealth management industry, there is such a focus on this. Most of the firms now will have a women in wealth initiative or a group. And actually, more and more financial advisors are women and private bankers are women. At the firms, especially the last couple I worked at, I would say over half are women. And so overall, I think it's still mostly men who are financial advisors, but it depends on what age range. That's because a lot of them haven't retired and a lot of them are over 50. And so there really is a huge emphasis on this. However, I found it was really challenging to actually target women clients. And a lot of women advisors want to work with women, and a lot of women clients want to work with female advisors. But I do think that some of the cliches are true, especially if you're talking about a married couple. No matter how hard I tried to engage the female spouse, 9 times out of 10, I was talking to the man. The man was the one asking the questions in the meeting. The man cared about the spreadsheets and the investment returns and the asset allocation and the things we're trained to talk to you about. And the women, to the extent they were involved at all, it was much more relationship focused. They didn't want to hear about the Monte Carlo simulations. They wanted to hear, how much house can I afford? How am I giving too much to my kids? And not that men don't care.
And who doesn't want to hear about a good Monte Carlo simulation? I'm
I,
sorry,
I
I
love it.
interrupted.
I see both sides, but I will say, and frankly, I think men have a lot to learn from women on this, because as our society, our culture, at least today, has become a lot more affluent, and as more and more of the fire bloggers are actually reaching financial independence, I do think the conversation has shifted toward, what is the purpose of your wealth? What is your intent? And even at JP Morgan, my most recent employer, we had a huge focus on that. The clients we worked with, by definition, were all financially independent or could have quit working if they wanted to, because our minimums were so high. So we were trained to really try to focus on these softer, quote unquote, feminine issues around money, generational wealth, how to hand it down responsibly, charitable intentions. And I do think that, again, whether because it's of society, women did tend to grasp those concepts more readily. They were excited to talk about that kind of a thing. How much can I afford to give? What can I do to with my community and my family? Again, I don't know how accurate the research is, but a lot of research in third world countries has shown the more money that you put in women's hands, the communities thrive. They give it to their neighbors, they give it to their children, they invest in education. It's not necessarily always the same if you put money in men's hands. The economy might flourish because of other activities, but it's not necessarily the same types of activities. So I do think, and married couples have a great opportunity to come together. But currently, especially as I work with clients getting divorced, it really is interesting. My goal with a lot of women, they instinctively go to the relationships. They're scheduling the therapy appointments. They want to make sure and keep the kids in the school district. And meanwhile, the men tend to immediately go towards the money management. They're moving money around, they're doing things, they're not so much in the fog. And that can be a real detriment to women who are going through a transition, because sometimes you do have to focus on the numbers. And that is obviously of paramount importance. But once you've won the game, or once you have a solid foundation in place, at a certain point, all the optimizing can become a little bit of a time waste, a little bit of an addiction, even for some of us optimizers that love this stuff. And really, you got to remember at the end of the day, what's it all for? And I think some of the early financial independent, retire early folks who did focus on the frugality, the extreme frugality, you got Mr. Money Mustache and all those early people who many of your listeners might have heard of or listened to, that a lot of them have come out to say they regret being so aggressive and being so frugal and maybe passing up on once in a lifetime opportunities and trips in their 20s to get to financial independence 8 months sooner. And it's easy to say that in hindsight. It's easy to say that with the privilege of having achieved it. But there is something to be said. Nobody needs to die the richest guy in the graveyard. But at some point, the future becomes today. And it's like, it's okay to spend a little. And so I do think that it's been interesting to see that shift toward, how do you use your money to create the life that you love, not just how do we accumulate the most, because that's only half the battle. Once you have it, what's the point? And that's what my divorce prompted me to reevaluate, which included a big career change. And that's what I help clients, regardless of how much they have. Some people leave these transitions with a lot less than they're used to, but that doesn't mean you can't become more empowered around money, and more, if you're spending it in alignment with your actual values instead of just how you've been spending it, you can still get a lot of satisfaction from using your money.
So when you're working with those couples, and perhaps just instinctively you're trying to at least equally engage each person in the conversation, but perhaps the husband, traditional couple husband, is taking the lead, and the wife is laying back there. Have you come up with any successful strategies for perhaps in engaging her into the conversation so that it's a more even conversation?
I'd like to say that I have all the most successful strategies, but obviously it depends on the client. And a lot of times, frankly, my strategy, which may or may not be the best, was just to have an independent relationship with each side of the couple, including even doing separate meetings. Because sometimes when you're creating a financial plan, of course, you all need to be on the same page of, but frankly, most people aren't. Even when it comes down to things like, when are we going to retire? You'll find a lot of couples, even affluent couples who are at retirement age, haven't even talked about it, and they might not be on the same page. And frankly, I think financial advisors think they need to be, more so than the couples think they need to be. And so it was always a delicate balance of, you don't want to annoy people with questions. I had a client once, this couple, and they had about a $50 million net worth. And a lot of it was real estate in other states. And so it was a very complex estate. And they were, I think they had children from different marriages. So they didn't have a will. And so I had these clients for years. And of course, my main job, quote unquote, was to manage their investment portfolio. But of course, as a good financial advisor, my number one thing was like, you got to get your estate plan in order. And I don't even get paid to do that. I was just trying to get them to engage an attorney to do this. And of course, I brought it up at every meeting, but they didn't want to do it. They finally eventually did, I'm happy to say. But once they didn't know the answers to the questions of what they wanted to do with the family ranch and those kinds of things. And so it's not that they didn't want to have a will, but they couldn't really decide what it should say. And so the years just ticked by. So it's things like that where my balance was really, yeah, I would love them to be on the same page, but I also don't want to get fired because they're annoyed that I'm annoying them. That was always a little bit of a balance that you have to do with folks. And so frankly, I don't know that. And to be honest though, I would sometimes refer folks to therapists. Financial advising has become really close to therapy. And there's actually a designation called a certified financial therapist that I've debated getting, because a lot of what I am doing with my clients now does border on counseling and goal setting and values alignment. The money is one side, but really, once the money box is checked, a lot of it is just personal. And so there is a blend of coaching and counseling that, if it gets to the level where I think you would benefit from an actual couples counselor, I do recommend that to some folks. But plenty of people are just happy being on different pages. And it's a stereotype, but the woman manages the spending and the man manages making it and analyzing the spreadsheets. And a lot of couples still, at least in Texas where I am, especially, a lot of couples still operate that way relatively happily. And so, of course, when there is a divorce, that's when traditionally, if you've been in that kind of a marriage, the wife may need a lot more help. And so that's one reason that I do gravitate towards helping those women who, whether they're financially independent or not, might be managing their money for the first time. And so I really get a lot of gratification of helping them start that clean slate and build a financial life for themselves.
So first of all, I want to thank you for being so transparent in your answer. You're not pretending that you have all this figured out. You have clients who you're still trying to figure this out with, and you're trying things. Financial coach, I do the same thing, and I have peers who do a lot of the same thing. So thank you for saying, hey, I have this figured out. But I will say that what you're advocating is interesting, because that's not, at least in the circles I run in, and even with the other people that I've had on this program, I think you may be the first who's just come out and blatantly said, you don't have to be you don't have to be on the same page. Maybe there has to be a, and let me dig into that a little bit more, because I think I know where you're going, but I want to just flesh that out a little bit, because I'll give an example. In real life, people that I don't work with, just friends of mine, but I'm always nosy about how people manage their money. So the ones who will share this with me, I do have quite a few friends that keep their financial lives separate, so to speak. There is a pool of that. There's an account where each spouse will deposit so much money. Maybe I'm responsible for paying the mortgage, and my wife is responsible for paying certain bills, and maybe saving for the kids' retirement, that kind of thing. But it's all divvied up, and there's an account. I'll put so much in this account, you put so much in this account. And then outside of that, what I do with my money is none of your business. Is that is that kind of a example of what you mean by keeping financial lives separate, or is it even more separate than that?
No, and I'm glad you asked that, because I actually am a big advocate of not having separate finances in that sense of who's paying the bills and having separate accounts and not knowing what's going on. What I was thinking is more along the lines of your goals and being on the same page about, it's easy to be goal focused, but first of all, goals change. You can set all the goals you want, and then there's a blow up and your child gets an illness, or there's a divorce, or the business suffers, or they start a new business. So I guess the thing that I have gone away from focusing on so much, and frankly, a lot of the software makes you do things like pick a retirement age. They're all based around this one big thing that's a retirement date, which is frankly less and less of a concrete thing for most people. The wealthy folks that I used to work with at these big firms, they might be serial entrepreneurs, or they might have retired and then started a new business, or retired and gone back to work multiple times. So they didn't think of it in that terms. And frankly, now even the Gen Z folks without any money yet, they're thinking of things the same way. People are living much more of a project-based life versus that traditional, quote unquote, was traditional for a very small group of people for a small amount of time, where you graduate from college, you go, or high school even, you get a steady job and your income gradually increases until you turn 65, and then you quit and you never work again. First of all, for women, that was never really the life thing. And then also, but even for many men, That's not possible anymore. People's income dips and goes up and down, and it's made us all a lot less stable. But as a result, I don't pressure people to have the same goals as much. I think it's hard enough in a couple to just manage the day to day. And so that's what I meant. When it comes to actually managing the money, I do think I have just not seen it work unless you're really just got hundreds of millions of dollars, which those are kinds of different people, but I have worked with those people. For the average couple where you're both earning money, I really think if you don't want to share it, I get it. Okay. And I've been through a divorce and I've seen it can cause havoc. But if you don't want to share your money in that way, don't get legally married, because that is what it means. It's a legal contract. So if the state is already considering all your stuff joint, one of my pet peeves is to hear clients or friends or people say, "Oh, this is my money and that's his account." I'm like, not legally, it's not, especially in a community property state like Texas. So you can think that all you want. And then there's a divorce or there's an issue that forces you to realize it actually really is joint. And so I think having separate things can be great. I'm not saying you have to see everything each person spends. That's what credit cards can be for. But personally, I think the relationships I've seen work the best is when all the income goes into one pot and all the expenses come out of that pot. Because, like I said, what if you get, otherwise, you're just constantly bickering over what's mine, what's yours, who gets the tax refund. I don't know, who over withheld too much. Is this thing for the house us, or is that a you expense? Because I actually don't care about it. Even down to like beauty things where it's our hair should be a joint expense because you're the one that cares about my hair. It just opens up this door to what are we doing if you're married and you're sharing a house and you're sharing kids. Just share the checking account, guys. Like, it really can make a lot of things a lot simpler. So that's my personal opinion. Obviously, if you're a later in life marriage and you have kids you both have kids that aren't each other's children, that's a different thing, because then there can be legal obligations and educational duties and things that you might want to keep separate. But on the whole, I think it's just a lot easier, and it can avoid what I call revenge spending if you have things joint. Because if you have things separate, so the spending increases, which is why that happens when you go through divorce, by the way. People's spending skyrockets because it's revenge spending. You're like, I'd rather spend it than let you have it. And there's these things, or he went out and spent this, so I'm going to go out and spend that. Even if you don't realize you're doing it, I've seen people fall into that. When you're on the same team and you're working towards the same goals, it just tends to build more wealth faster, in my experience. And I did it with my ex, and I navigated a very amicable divorce because we were always transparent and we made different amounts over the years. It can work even if the quote worst case happens that you get divorced. If you build a lot of wealth together, it can still be a good thing.
Yeah, and forgive me that I'm sticking on this subject for a bit, but
Hey, it's your show. Let's
in
talk about whatever you want.
in 200 and some odd episodes, this is going down a unique path. At any time I can go down a unique path after 200 episodes, I get a little excited. So let's do this. I'm still grappling a little bit with the concept we're talking about here. You manage your money together, but yet you have separate goals. Now, when I think about goals, I'm thinking about kind of the big picture goals. It's like retirement, or how we're going to fund the kids college, or where are we going to live, how much do we want to spend on a house, that kind of thing. Things that for most couples by definition have to be joint
Mm-hmm.
goals because it's going to take both of you to get there. You seem to be thinking about it in a little different way. So when you talk about separate goals, can you unpack that a little bit?
Okay, that's a good distinction because, for instance, I think both people in a couple, if you're managing money together, which if you're married, legally, you, in my opinion, should be on some level at least, you should agree on goals in the sense of this is how much we're going to put towards retirement this year. Now, whether or not you actually agree on should we be retiring at 65 versus 68, like you don't have to have that argument. And so I guess so day to day, year to year, month to month, you need to agree on the budget, generally speaking. You obviously have to agree on which house to buy and all those things, which many people don't, and you negotiate those. But I think the big picture, having the whole life planned out, goals, I'm less worried about you agreeing on, or even frankly having, because for instance, the retirement goal, a lot of advisors will start with what age do you want to retire and how much do you want to spend when you get there? Frankly, none of the projections work unless you have those two variables in there. And nobody knows. Most of my clients never know even how much they spend. We finance nerds might know. I've tracked my spending on whatever website, Mint, before it went under. Now Monarch for 20 years. I love doing it. I can tell you how much I spend. Most people cannot tell you with any degree of certainty how much they spend or want to spend. especially if they're working with me and they're coming out of a transition like selling a business or getting divorced or getting married, because it's all going to change anyway. So I have, over my experience, I have gotten a lot further away from those rules of thumbs and having to try to nail people down on things that it turns out they're just making it up and it's going to change. And that's not comfortable for somebody that's an obsessive planner like me, but that's one reason I have shifted. Now, you still have to have a plan, but I think most people need to be a lot more flexible about it than we try to force them to be in the financial planning community, because the reality is none of us knows what kind of technology is going to be developed, what kind of inventions are going to happen, what our healthcare system is going to look like. So trying to nail down what my spending is going to be even in 5 years, much less in 25 years, is a futile exercise. We could all have home robots by then and they cost X, and that's just standard. There wasn't the iPhone when I was first starting out in life. A lot of things can change dramatically, and that's going to change our spending. So I do try to be a little looser on, hey, you need to save for retirement. Y'all don't have to agree on where you're going to live and where you're going to, when it's going to happen. Because a lot of people can get really hung up on focusing too much on that. And it makes you live in the future instead of in the present anyway.
Okay. That I can fully grasp and agree with, because the whole thing about the assumptions, I'll say again, I'm a little older than 40. So I'm a lot closer to actually I'm having a lot of those conversations now for execution in the short term. And even when I'm asked those questions, I appreciate the fact that you can pull numbers out of the air. You can drive assumptions to get to almost any result that you
Mm-hmm.
want. And I feel like I've positioned myself relatively well. I did, by the way, am that little thin sliver that graduated college, worked for decades, and now I'm approaching traditional retirement. I do agree, by the way, that's a small amount of people, and it's a model that to me is experimental, quite frankly,
Mm-hmm.
because people maybe right around my age, maybe a little older, are really the first ones to come out of the other side of that.
Yeah.
People treat that like that's handed down off the mountain on a stone tablet. In reality, it was a theory that we're still trying to see how it works out. But even when I'm going through those examples, I hopefully, God willing, have another 20 or 30 years left on this side of eternity. And how much is going to change in those 20 or 30 years? So, it, now the type of person I am, the money geek I am, I just run a lot of scenarios. You're talking about Monte Carlo simulations. I have simulated myself to almost to the point of exhaustion and
Oh, me
and
too.
and,
It's my
and, and
security
perhaps yeah
secret. I love a spreadsheet. I go stare at it when I need support.
yeah
There's
yeah
people like us where that is helpful.
yeah. So for me, it's really more of a what do I have to do to break this? Because I go to the average financial planner, I give them my assumptions. They say, "Oh yeah, you're good." It's okay based on those assumptions. What if I assume this happens? I assume that happens, and I
Mhm.
just drive it until it breaks. And that way I know there's a range, but I also have some idea of how many of my assumptions can go wrong before the
Yeah.
whole thing goes wrong. And for me at least, if that is enough of a doomsday scenario where maybe we're not even worried about currency, we're worried about canned goods and bullets, it's okay. I'll take my chances.
And I do think you're bringing up a good point, because one thing that I've also seen in, for people like that and like me, frankly, it sounds like with what you're dealing with, is it causes such an over accumulation. Because if you want to save enough to make sure that no matter what, you're fine, that's an enormous number of millions of dollars. That the reality is, that's why the research shows clearly most retirees die with more money than they retired with. Most people, and these aren't even just rich people, this is everybody, that people that start out with just a couple 100,000 maybe, but they don't touch it. No matter what you retire with, whether you're on the lower end or the higher end of the net worth scale, the research has steadily shown, and again, it's modern history, so things can change. Most people don't tap into their assets ever. They live off a little bit of the dividends and interest. But even if you know all the 4%, 5% withdrawal rate, people struggle to start spending. And if you've spent your life accumulating and to some degree putting your identity on building these numbers and seeing the savings increase, it is so hard psychologically to flip that switch. And one thing that's good about having these midlife transitions, whether they're positive or negative, or getting married, getting divorced, having an inheritance, or losing a parent, these are all, they can be celebrations, or they can be traumatic, but it makes people reevaluate things and sometimes make big changes, which always is going to impact your financial plan. And the reality is most of us will figure it out, and which is not something I would just tell clients YOLO and don't worry about it. But there's two different kinds of clients, and most of them aren't clients if they're the YOLO mentality in the first place. But the average financial advice to just generic population is always, you need to save more, you need to quit spending. And that's true for a certain portion of people, but there's also people on the other end of that, that it's, dude, you need to loosen up, and you don't need to do the 2%. People are arguing the 4% rule is too aggressive, when really the whole definition of the rule is that it's designed to work in the worst case scenarios. And they're arguing 3%, 2%. 2%, that's less than a dividend yield on a, you're going to be, and granted, there's not a meteorite plan. The world could also just, we could have a nuclear bomb and we're all screwed. But in that case, it's not going to matter anyway. And so part of my journey has been loosening up a little bit and being comfortable with the uncertainty. Of course, naturally, though, when the next stock market recession, which we will have one day, everybody automatically gets a little more conservative. And what you with retirees, even those on a fixed income, people naturally spend less when the markets are uncertain or down, and they naturally spend more, and they'll go on that cruise or buy that car in the years where it's up. So for all the research and agonizing that we all do over the exact withdrawal rate and the exact Monte Carlo simulation, I have never had a client, no matter how anal, that actually stuck to any kind of withdrawal plan over any length of time. Like, people will listen to you and they look at you and then they go spend whatever they want. It's very intuitive, even for analytical folks like me. So it is interesting to see that. That's why I say you need to have a plan, but hold it loosely. And if you're heading in the right direction, trust yourself to adjust, especially if you're a very analytical person. You will adjust way before you run out of money. You'll go back to work or you'll cut that spending, and it'll probably be fine.
So I'll go back to something that you mentioned earlier. When you're working with couples, sometimes you will meet with them separately. That the reason, or in general, one of the reasons that you do that, maybe one of them is analytical, the other is not so analytical. The analytical one is driving the non-analytical one crazy. So by having separate meetings, you can have a more analytically focused meeting with one and have more of a goals life oriented discussion with the other. They're both driving towards the same plan, but you're helping to bridge the fact that they're talking two different languages and driving to that same plan. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, and also,
Now I understand.
and the other thing is, the person that's more analytical or more advanced, more savvy financially, is going to drive the conversation. And of course, I'm going to answer those questions and see be high level. So what I have found is, a lot of times the spouse who's not as financially obsessive or savvy, however you want to phrase it, they have questions that are basic and they don't ask them. So if their partner is there, and it's not always the man, but if the partner is there asking all the high level stuff, they don't want to interrupt and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, wait, what is this? What is equities?" Like, I've had clients ask me, "What is an equity? What does that mean?" And I forget, because I never want to feel like I'm talking down to people, but we do it without realizing it, because we just live in this world and we have this vocabulary. So I have found, meeting with people one on one, sometimes they'll ask things that, it's not that they wouldn't ask their spouse, but they, in that kind of a meeting, they're not necessarily going to bring up. And so I can tailor my conversation appropriately, or walk them through something that would be boring for the other one that they already understand, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think about the meetings that my wife and I have with our financial advisor, and it's a lot like that. And it's before the Zoom or whatever starts, she and I can be having a conversation and having a good exchange. But when we're on with that person, she gets really quiet.
Mhm.
And I know when we get super engaged and we're talking our thing, we're just geeking away, and she withdraws from the conversation. And this is supposed to be our conversation. But yet, I think he and I start talking that language and just go off into space. But I've also noticed that when she does interject, it's a great question
Yeah.
because it's coming from a different, it's it's not as geeky as anything that we've been talking about, but it's a good, solid, normal person sitting back looking at this type of question. So I can see sometimes you have to separate people, but it's
Well, and
great if they can work that out so they can have one conversation incorporating two different perspectives.
sure. And I would never say only meet with couples separately. You definitely have to
Right,
have
right.
those meetings where it's together, especially if you're going over maybe the big annual review, that's going to be together. Because you're right. Even the spouse that maybe doesn't know, quote unquote, much about money, their questions will be the ones that get right to the heart of the matter. And we're over here in the spreadsheet and they're like, wait, I'm sorry. So wait, like, how much are we saving for college? Or wait, what's the point of this? Like, it'll just be, oh yeah, you forget the goals and you get in the nitty gritty. And they'll say, okay, so wait, when's the mortgage going to be paid off? And so there is definitely the balance to having both. And sometimes it brings it back to the big picture, the big planning goals, because nobody gets excited. People that aren't in the weeds and don't understand it, the big debate between couples who are like that, where one's one way and one's the other, it tends to be about spending, because saving for retirement's not exciting if you don't see the goals and you don't understand the point, or saving for anything. And so part of getting your spouse on the same page, at least to some degree, can be talking about the goals, talking about, wait, I want to buy that dream house and here's when we can maybe do it. So sometimes it can bring both together, where one person's talking about what's the point of it all, not just getting a higher net worth every year, and the other person's, okay, but here's why we need to be saving 20% to the 401k. It's so that we can move to Florida when I'm 60 or whatever it might be. And so it does take both perspectives, because otherwise certain types of people would just save and work forever and hoard forever. They don't even care about retirement. And so it can really go both ways. You got to have both. Yeah.
Yeah, don't talk about me. I'm right here. Don't talk about me like that. But yeah, so that is application for both my life and the people I work with and everything else. So thanks for entertaining that conversation. Thank you for the conversation in general. I do want to get briefly to one other topic, because another thing that I try to take advantage of when I have guests that have this background is, you've spent a lot of time working with wealthy clients. This podcast is not directed towards those people. It's directed towards the people who maybe are trying to become those people one day. And one of my personal pet peeves is, you can go on social media or a lot of different places, and I hear these people talking about, these are the secrets of the wealthy. This is what the wealthy know that nobody else knows. And usually you listen to it, and in my opinion, I don't know, it's crap. But it leads people, I think, down this road of, I can't achieve what these people achieve because there are some secrets that they know that I
Mhm.
don't know. And if I don't know these secrets, and you just get angry and frustrated and shaking your heads at the clouds and not doing what you can do. So I want to ask somebody who's not talking about this from theory, not talking about this from a book they read, not talking about this from some Instagram reel that they saw. Are there really secrets of the rich? And I know that there are strategies that the wealthy implement,
That's the key
but
distinction.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's not a secret. There's things only wealthy people do, because you got to have a lot of money before it makes sense to do it. It's chicken or the egg. Setting up a complex trust structure isn't going to make you the money. If you have money and you need to shelter it in certain ways, then you might need a complex trust structure. But I laugh at most of this stuff as well. You're part of the reason I have not joined the whole internet marketing world. There's a lot of good info out there as well. But like any topic, the good, stable, responsible advice does not get the clicks. Okay. And so what you're going to see is what's gotten the clicks, which is probably some hokey, salesy. It doesn't mean it's not right, but, or often it does mean that, but not necessarily. But either way, it's going to be something extreme. It's going to be something weird. And one of my things, regardless of the topic, if it starts with the secrets that they don't want you to know, just keep scrolling. It doesn't matter if it's about politics or money or health or fitness. There's no secret your doctor doesn't want you to know. There's no secret that the wealthy don't want you to know. And I will tell you, one of the things I have loved and been astonished by from the day I started being a private banker when I was 23 years old, and I had wealthy clients. Some of them were just lower end, wealthy, normal, affluent people. Some of them, as I increased my career and worked at bigger banks, were billionaires. They really are normal. Some of them get eclectic tastes and they buy cars that are crazy to think about, $500,000. But they really, most of them, vast majority of them started with nothing, started a business that made it big. They really were and are normal people. And so they also have the same money worries as everybody else, which is why I had a job, because if wealthy people just knew what to do and didn't worry about money, they wouldn't pay all the advisors. But they worry about spoiling their kids. They worry about how much they should be giving. It really is. It doesn't matter if you have 1 million or 100 million. A lot of it really is the same. And so being on the inside, it gave me a lot of reassurance and gave me a lot of confidence, Because frankly, I had more savings than some of my clients sometimes. Like people do dumb stuff with money. It's just if you have a big paycheck, you can cover up a lot of mistakes. They spend too much, they argue. Like it's all the same problems and opportunities as everybody. If there's any kind of a secret, it's how to earn the money to make that much money. And granted, some people inherit it. I've worked with multi-generational families because at a certain point you have enough, you have so much that you can never spend it. Your kids are going to be trust fund kids, but unless you just give it all away, which some clients do. But on the flip side of that, it really is, there's no secrets. It's a long story short. There's definitely strategies that we all probably know about in the, if you're listening to this podcast. You can reduce your taxes by contributing to a tax advantaged account. You can deduct certain deductions. It's not that there aren't things that are smart to do, but they're not secrets. Every financial book tells you the same thing for a reason. Avoid high interest debt, max your Roth IRA, and then it's just repeat for 20 or 40 years. It's really that simple. And that's what most wealthy people do. The only thing that makes some of my super wealthy clients different was to get that wealthy. You don't do that by maxing out your 401k. Most of those people built that wealth because they had a business that went big. And plenty of entrepreneurs go broke though. So that doesn't mean start a business, that you have to start a business. But it's most of those people, that would be the difference. But again, I'm not an expert on how to start a business, so I can't help you there. But that would be the only secret I would know about is if you're trying to save $100 million, that's a different strategy than if you're just trying to retire and have a good life with a few $1 million. Most people can do that with most jobs if they start early enough and avoid some big mistakes.
Yeah, and for anybody who wants to have $100 million or wants to be a billionaire or whatever their target is, I challenge them, with like at least three whys on
Uh-huh.
that and drill it down far enough because even billionaires don't necessarily have great tangible reasons for wanting to become a billionaire. Most of them don't start out wanting to be a billionaire. It's just what their idea and working their passion or whatever has gotten them to that point. There are always exceptions to the rule. I'm not saying that everybody has the purest of intent. There are some people who just want money for power. And if you want to be one of those people, more power to you. And we probably don't have anything to talk about because you're a different type of animal. We don't need to be talking anyway. But I'm so glad you said that because the thing I hate most about that type of information is I think it's tendency to discourage people and make this thing seem unattainable because in my lifetime I've seen so many positive steps in directions. It's not so much secrets, but just the whole system has become so much more democratized as far as investing. Just for kicks and for memories, I still hold on to a Charles Schwab account I opened back in the 90s. And when I opened that account, the fees for trading were pretty ridiculous. So I was an early adopter because I'm geeky like that. But not a lot of people had those accounts, and they certainly weren't trading in the way that they trade in them now just because of the fees. The way that's been democratized, the way that you can invest pretty much in whatever you want now.
Yeah.
So, at least as far as
For
that
free
world,
or almost free.
exactly. The shields are down is actually much more. There were never secrets, but if anything, at least that particular avenue to wealth, which is just one, like you said, of many, the shields have been lowered. So thank you. That's something that I'm preaching constantly on this podcast, but frankly, it's something that you having exposure to those people have a little bit more credibility than I do. So
Well, and
thanks for that.
look, money is important. I've always thought that, but at the same time, there's different types of wealth. And so, one thing that I like to think about is, and which when young people, especially coming out of college, I don't envy them, frankly. And it seems like I can never buy a house. I could never save much money. It can just seem unattainable to even, I can never even pay off my student loan debt. And it's so much easier, and the internet will stoke this, to blame somebody or the rich people or the capitalist society or the Republicans or the Democrats or whatever. And I get that tendency. We're human. That's how we're built. But and it sound like such, I feel like an old person saying this, but it's so much easier now. So even just living a good life costs less money after inflation adjustment. Like it's easy to talk about the boomers. Oh, they all got to just buy a house at 30 and they could pay themselves through college. But they also didn't have modern appliances. They didn't have technology. That my dad was a broker at Merrill Lynch in the 80s, and he says what you were talking about, that you had to call somebody and pay hundreds of dollars to trade, which meant you had to have a lot of money for that fee to make sense. And then you had to, my grandma used, and my dad used to do this, they'd watch the TV with the stock ticker. You couldn't just look at your phone. There wasn't the internet. Remember before the internet? I barely do, but I do. So you couldn't even just track your portfolio or much less anything else. People would go to the library to get an encyclopedia to look up something. And now there's just all information is free, which we take for granted, but it is really an insanely cool thing. I had to learn about Roth IRAs and all this stuff the hard way, the slow way over time. Now, any book you get at the library is going to have all the strategies laid out for right there. They're really the information that's democratized, to your point, is so powerful. And if you live in a city, at least, things like Uber and DoorDash, you used to have to be a multimillionaire to have your own private driver. Now, any millennial with a cell phone can have a private driver anywhere they want to go for about $10. So stuff like that, we really can live quote unquote millionaires. That if you look at old movies like 90s movies, the things that the uber wealthy were doing is now the things that like everybody just does. And so I think that our goals have gotten out of control, which is part of the frustration. So young people want to buy their first house, but they want it to be a 4-bedroom home with marble counters. That's not what your mom and your dad had when they were 30. They might have owned a house, but it was probably like 1,200 square feet. The whole family shared one bathroom. And if you actually look back, a lot of things have gotten so much better. And yes, they've gotten more expensive too, but it's just helpful to keep in mind. So when anytime young people are frustrated, and I think that's why it's harder for older people to have sympathy, which I do have sympathy for folks starting out. Some things really are harder. There are systematic barriers. I'm not here to say that there's not, but some things are easier too. And unfortunately, that's going to cause more inequality, but it's a lot easier than it's ever been to be on the wealthy side of that inequality ladder.
Yeah, first of all, you're not old by any objective measure, but you obviously have an old soul. You and I could just sit on the porch in rocking chairs and just talk about these kids today
I
because
know.
you're expressing a lot of what I feel because I went through those things.
Yeah.
I lived in the period. One of my first conscious memories of even getting interested in investing was trying to decipher what that was at the back of the newspaper where they used to have the little ticker things. And my father would come home and watch the evening news, and Walter Cronkite would tell you what the Dow did today. And me asking him, "Well, what's the Dow?" So it was those type of things where, unless you were an extremely geeky kid that worried your parents because you were asking all of these out of left field questions, you didn't have exposure to. And the fact that you have so much exposure to so much information, the whole thing about home affordability. Hey, look, I am technically a baby boomer. I was born the last year of the baby boom. So I'm either an extremely young baby boomer or the world's oldest Gen Xer. But I'm right on that line. And I can remember when I graduated college looking and going, how am I ever going to be able to afford a house? It was not, hey, I can go out and buy a house the next day. It seemed unattainable to me at the time as well. So is it more unattainable now? Is it more of a challenge? Maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I still have to maintain that there is a way, which is why I love working with clients trying to find help them to find that way.
Well, and to
Elizabeth,
your point,
mhm,
what difference does it make if it's harder? You gonna do it
yeah,
or not? We can
yeah,
quibble over it, but and
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's one thing that I do love with my clients, because again, I've worked with some folks coming out of divorce that are taking major hits to their lifestyle and their income and all these things as a household. But we do have the opportunity in this society to, even if you're dealing with not large sums of money, if you're spending and using your money to build the life that you want and that's aligned with your values, not just having stuff, but having the things or the time that you want. That's my passion, is helping people feel empowered and feel good about their financial plan, even if we're not talking about millions of dollars. Frankly, it's more important even then, because you can still have a great life and you can still feel secure financially, even if we're talking about smaller dollars.
So, if you're listening to this and if you're getting discouraged and if you are feeling overwhelmed through challenges, there are people like me and there are people like Elizabeth out there to help you. You know where you can find me if you're listening to this podcast. You can find Elizabeth and I'm not going to screw this up the way I did before we hit record, at melizabethgeorge.com. That is her website, her online location, her Facebook, her Instagram also play off of the M. Elizabeth George brand. We'll put direct links in the show notes. And I have to say, before the episode, had Elizabeth not corrected me, I would have said me, Elizabeth George. It is not me, Elizabeth George. It is M, the letter M, ElizabethGeorge.com. Elizabeth, thank you so much for the conversation. We were talking a little early. We're recording this on a Saturday afternoon, and I was a little looser even than usual coming into this conversation. I am so happy that you brought your A game and that we were able to really have, I I think, really honest, enlightening conversation on all the subjects that we covered. Thanks for carving out time on your Saturday. Thanks for being on CFO at Home today.
Thank you. I enjoyed the conversation so much. And yes, I hope you didn't get us canceled with all the male female stuff, but I was loser too. So now I can go enjoy the rest of our Saturdays and maybe have a drink.
Thanks.